Welcome to another episode of How Did It Make Sense from Human in the System? And the goal of these podcasts is to explore first stories and second stories. The first stories are those which are simple, linear, they don't contain all the information, and as a consequence, we jump to conclusions, and that's normal human behavior. And then we'll dig into a second story which explores that context and how did it make sense for those people involved to do what they did, because they were exercising their own local rationality. Most people, I'm going to say it's a generalism, most people don't go to work to do a bad job. They're trying to do the best they can. And we're interviewing and having conversations with people in multiple different domains, not just high-risk industries, but also sort of personal behaviors and leadership and all sorts. So, Ben, welcome to this podcast. Tell the audience who you are, what you do, how do you get to where you are, and where people can find you?
Great. Thank you, Gareth. I really appreciate being here, and I love what you're doing, and it's fabulous. I often use some of your thinking in terms of just asking, well, how did it make sense for someone to have done something? I think that's a very revealing question. So I'm Ben Cattaneo. I am the founder of the Decision Making Studio, which is my advisory firm, and very boutique firm. It's been around for just over a year, and I help individuals and organizations make quality decisions under uncertainty. And I got to where I'm doing it. So there's the linear version and there's a non-linear version. I'll try and give you the linear version, which is simply, I spent many years in the field of corporate and strategic risk management, most recently at BT Group here in the UK. I'm based in London, although I'm Canadian by where I grew up. And I just got kind of frustrated with the fact that a lot of work that I thought is very important and an industry and a field called risk management was really just divorced from decision making. I always looked at it as we help people make good decisions. And what seems to be happening, and it's an interesting phenomenon because I think it's happening in lots of other fields where decisions get made and then later, afterwards, we write down all the risk factors and it goes into some sort of report and people are happy because there's a report that gets produced. I was just getting very frustrated by that. And in parallel, I've been doing a podcast as well for many years. And I've been getting all these ideas. We're talking about Annie Duke, and I've had her on the show 3 times and all this wonderful,
cool,
rich stuff that I was finding really difficult to apply in my day-to-day job. And so I said, screw this, I am going to go out on my own. And I founded the Decision Making Studio. And so I work with clients around problems that have lots of uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity to them. So things like ethical decision making or geopolitics or things of that nature, where there's lots of factors, there's no clear right answer. And what I do is just simply help people with the how around making these decisions. I don't tell people what to do, but I give people tools, ways of thinking, frameworks, ways in which they might be able to look at a problem a little bit differently. And they come up with, solutions, ways forward, because they know their area. I'm helping them with that. So that's more or less what I do. And I can be found at thedecisionmaking.studio. Ben at thedecisionmaking.studio is my email address if anyone wants to reach out.
Cool.
But and got a podcast.
We'll stick that in the show notes. That's cool.
Sure. Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's really cool. And I think it's a critical piece is when you're in that sort of consultancy type role, and it's sort of very trite statement, but you sit there, you help them find the answers. You're not the expert in their space. And if they've helped find those answers, there's some level of ownership and they move on. And so thank you for that. Ben, what is that first story then that you want to share to people?
This will be a little bit off the cuff and a little bit of I'm going to throw in different factors here from different places. So it's a story. It's a single story, but because of the nature of it, I don't want to make it really obvious what I'm talking about. So look, very simply, the example is in an organizational context. and
Hmm.
this is an organization I've worked with, and they had an opportunity to enter a new market, so the Chinese market, and
Hmm.
they thought, well, this is great, because they got all the sort of licenses, and they thought huge consumer market, huge opportunity, and so we'll go in, have to negotiate with a joint venture partner. That's fine. Set everything sort of up, but it didn't really go as planned, and forecasted revenues just weren't there. There were a lot of things they just didn't understand about doing business
Hmm.
in that market, and then things took a bit of a turn with the relationship between the U.S. and China over the last few years. It's been well publicized, and
Hmm.
a number of contextual factors. They work in technology, so lots of security concerns and things that, with the benefit of hindsight, they probably should have knew
Hmm.
about or considered, but didn't. Ended up having to leave, and at either a loss or not having made much money, but not worth not worth
It
it
wasn't
really.
a major success. Yeah. So
Not a major
so
success.
it's sort of a simple. No, and so that first story might be organization goes into new field, fails because they didn't understand the landscape in which they're
Mm.
operating. And I'm pretty sure that that's not an unusual story, because there are lots of organisations who, for whatever reason, start going into that space, and it's really I need to go and find those episodes from Annie Duke, because
Mm.
so I've just finished reading her book of Quit,
Mm.
and there are so many things in there, so many great examples of the reasons why people carry on, why they don't end early, why they don't quit, and there's a whole bunch of sort of
Mm.
social, cultural, and technical reasons that come into that, cognitive biases as well. So
Mm.
Ben, are you able to explore that local rationality? What are the reasons why they ended going into that market to start with, and then missed
Mm.
some of the signs, and actually as a learning point, what were the trigger
Mm.
points that allowed them to get out? Because you could say, actually, if they quit, that's a success, rather than staying there and sitting there going, no,
Uh,
and burning money
yeah.
as they go along. So,
Yeah.
so I think there's two
They,
sides to
mm.
this. So over to you, Ben.
They certainly, yeah, no, they certainly didn't say that, we're quitting and therefore that's a success. And I think that's a kind of a fundamental problem, with organizations, is that, I'm a big advocate for this thing called decision quality, which is all
Mm,
about how you decide. How we decide is fundamental because we don't have control over all the variables. We only can make the best decision we can based on what we knew at the time. Now, the benefit of hindsight, there were loads of questions that they could have asked, but they did not ask,
hmm.
and that's
Excuse me.
interesting, um, because then we talk about the sort of the local rationality. I think there are lots of factors there, and I think just more broadly, if I could just kind of make a
Yeah, yeah,
broader
go for
point, I
it.
think organizations and the way that we govern ourselves, the way that organizations are governed, it just hasn't kept pace with the way the world is. That the world is
Hmm.
uncertain, it's complex, and we need to hold leaders to account for the quality of the decisions they make, not to the outcomes, because outcomes can be
Yeah,
generated by a combination of skill and luck. And so we need to be able to go back. And this is the fundamental problem. Like, I'm giving you this anecdotally, but I can't go back and say, this is exactly what they knew at the time they made this decision. This is why they made it. This is what they considered. This is what they failed to consider. That's where we need to get to. And so I'm giving you this kind of anecdotally, but
no, that's
I
good.
willing to bet that 99% of the time, with big strategic decisions, most organizations can't do that, can't sort of go back. I keep something called a decision journal, by the way. So anytime I make a big decision, I kind of
Mm.
write down what I know, my assumptions, what I'm trying to achieve. And then I can kind of go back and say, well, is something different? And in spite of all the data that organizations have and keep and have access to, they're really not able to do that. They're not able to go back and say, this is what we knew, this is what we tried to know. So I'm trying to piece this together from hindsight. So that's a very complex. So maybe we're diving into the second part of this, but
no, that's that's really as important is understanding. You're sort of scoping the limitations of how we make decisions individually and organizationally.
Yeah. So there are two or three things that were going on. I think one was a bit of a hype factor. So a few years ago, everyone was moving into China, and it was sort of a hot market, even though there were all these, the tide was turning. But it was sort of, there's a FOMO thing, which is very interesting because you've got lots of rational people who have, advanced degrees in things like finance or strategy or MBAs, but they're actually making quite emotional, intuitive decisions. Intuition is not necessarily a bad thing, but in this case, there was some FOMO going on. So that's part of it. I think the second thing that was going on is that this is a business unit that was in some financial duress. So they're not quite hitting their targets, needing. So
you're in the losses already. Yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily in the losses, but it's just sort of a bit hit and miss whether or not they would hit their targets every year, and the strategy was questioned, and it was they needed a win, and so there was that going on.
So when I would talk about the loss, so just the losses piece there is. It's sort of terms from Annie Duke's bit of actually you're either winning or you're losing.
Yeah.
And if you're not winning, you've got to be in the losses. So actually rather than they're losing stuff, they're not in the winning space. So sorry, apologies, God.
Yeah, no, that's good. Really good So I think there's a bit of like we need to change the narrative. We need to change things because what we're doing isn't working. And so it's almost sometimes when you're getting a little desperate, you take bigger and bigger risks. And so I think that played into it. And so the questions that they could have and should have asked, they just didn't. And so, so that I think was.
And is that because they don't know the question to ask, or is it because the social setting doesn't allow those questions to be asked?
So interesting. That's so interesting. I think it's probably a combination. But when you start to bring in maybe experts on the country or some case studies of like what are other companies experiencing when they're doing something similar, there was some resistance to hearing those, which to me tells me that
it's not the story we want to hear.
It's not the story we want to hear. So we're going to sort of downplay, or we're unique, we're different, this isn't going to happen to us. So they, the likelihood of experiencing what those guys experienced, that isn't, that's much less for us. We're much better. We're, this sort of thing. So there's quite a lot of collective delusion, a lot of bias. So there wasn't a failure to ask the right questions, but I think there was a lot of gamesmanship in theater that we are doing, say, a risk assessment or this or that to kind of show that we've considered all these factors theater. And we're doing something about it's theater. So a fair bit of theater. I think fundamentally, you hit the nail on the head. There's it's this sort of form over substance, and I think driven by, and if you really peel the layers back, it's executives under some stress, financial stress. There's this sort of some FOMO going on, and that colors everything else. And also you have to think about like, in an organizational context. They call this the manager agent problem. In that the executives
explore that.
Yeah, so it's a term in economics actually, which means the people who are the agents are the shareholders, so that's their money. The executives are the managers, and so it's not their money, and it's just so managers can make decisions that are riskier because they might have to get another job, but ultimately it's not they don't have any skin in the game.
Interesting.
And this is this is well well studied in financial crises, for example, where you've got bankers who there's regulations around, you can claw back bonuses and things like this, but there are, managers who make decisions, and if the bank blows up, well, the bank blows up, but it's not my money.
Yeah.
But if I don't hit my numbers, I don't get my bonus, and so it's a structural thing. It's a kind of a governance thing, and so I think there's a little bit of that involved as well. Incentive structures just don't align, and so that,
I was thinking there's also going to be the other way around, where the shareholders are demanding expected profits.
Yes.
And so that's going to drive behaviors the other way, that says basically, if we don't get those, we don't get the investment, we can't grow. And so those managers now don't get their internal bonuses. So there's got to be an interesting tension that exists there. And, one of the things I'm very keen about this podcast is to explore that this local rationality and how did it make sense is not just a sharp end issue. We often talk about those people get hurt, and it's like, well, why did they do that? And you sit there and go, these same issues exist at multiple levels within the organization.
Yes. And so this is why I keep coming back to this thing about governance, because shareholders, boards, all of these these structures that we have need to be able to look at an organization and say, are these guys making good decisions? Right. So if you've got the same, FOMO pressure on the people who are actually representing the shareholders, and they're not able to ask those kinds of questions, then you can see where things kind of go wrong. You can see how the kind of the structures get enmeshed in this sort of stuff. So I think we're now diving to the more, a bit of the nonlinear. Because there's a lot going. Once you start to throw all these variables there, it becomes really interesting. I also find that in my field, I call myself a recovering risk management professional. So we're very good at pointing out why things went wrong or how things could go wrong, or this sort of thing. But we're not that great at and I'm talking about for the risk profession. We're not that great at actually figuring out how people make decisions and how exactly how it made sense for this to happen.
Yeah.
So that part is really interesting. And if, for example, we were just to go back in time and just start thinking about this particular decision and just say, wait a minute, let's unpack this a little bit. And one of the things that I think is really important in any decision-making process, which doesn't happen, is a lack of framing. And one of the key questions, I think, is what's the problem we're really trying to solve here? And the problem, if we ask that, and if we're transparent about that and honest about that, is that, look, we're not doing too hot. We need to we need to find ways to to reverse the trend, and that's really the problem we need to solve. Not we have to. How can we make make this opportunity in China work?
Get into that market, or beat other people.
Or launch this product. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be moving to this. It could be. I think a lot of this stuff on AI, for example, is happening right now. With a lot of organizations think that they need to be in AI and do this, and it's very, very interesting, because AI is an efficiency play. And all of a sudden, if everyone's doing the same stuff, everyone becomes just as efficient, and there's no real innovation happening. Is you kind of have to do it. But anyway, if when that decision was made, the question simply was, how can we improve our market position,
revenue generation for that business unit.
Exactly. Rather than how can we make this China thing work, right? Being very clear on the problem that you really need to solve is crucial, and that takes honesty, and that takes some humility, right? And so the local rationality thing is, I don't think there was a lot of humility at all, because I think there's, you've got senior leaders who don't want to admit making mistakes, don't want to admit how they got into this financial mess in the first place, because a lot of those execs were still sort of there. And so
even the word admit has got a negative connotation to it. And if you own part of that decision making, the sort of the IKEA effect or the endowment effect, where actually, we're now part of that. That's part of what we do. It's really hard to step away from that and say that was a bum decision for a whole bunch of other, social, cultural, cognitive reasons.
Yeah. And so it's hard to have that honest conversation. And I'm trying to put myself into in the shoes of an executive, where like, if you have had a few things that just, if I had them back, I would have done them better. But I'm not going to admit that, because then there's an admission of, weakness or incompetence or something. And then this is a real thing in organizations, and you're kind of competing against your peers and this sort of thing. So you're not really going to do that unless there's a culture of that at a leadership team level, where we were able to actually say, this is the decision I made, this is why I made it, this is what I knew at the time, this is what I didn't know. And so, fine, with the benefit of hindsight, it didn't work out, but at the time, this was how I made it. And if you transported me back to that same spot, I probably would have done the same thing. And that's where we want to get to. That's not an easy conversation to have at senior leadership levels, but it's increasingly a conversation that we need to have in our organizations and in our societies. Yeah. And that requires a huge leadership shift. So that's partly what I'm trying to do.
No, it's really cool. And that's really what your business is about, I'm guessing, then, from what we're discussing, is helping people in that situation. And, I do it at a team level, and maybe multiple teams, not at the board level. But it's that piece that says we've got to create the environment where there is low professional jeopardy when we explore these decisions, and get people to understand their sort of cognitive, social, cultural behaviors, because of the context they're in, and then sit them and go, right, now we're going to move from a no jeopardy situation, knowing that this is how our brains behave and how we as a peer group behave. Right, let's move that into the professional jeopardy situation, and giving them the tools to sit there and go, right, how do we isolate this? And to sit there and go, right, what is it that we can do to help us to make better decisions in the here and the now, that afterwards we sit there and go, oh, they're stupid. But that's also this recognition that we're all fallible. And I think until there is that acceptance of fallibility, and it's one of the things of going to an organization and trying to develop a just culture, which is really about supporting that you can't develop a just culture in an organization until you have overtly accepted fallibility within anybody within the system. It doesn't matter if you're a low-level frontline operator or whether or not you're part of the C-suite. You are human. You've got performance variability.
This is so important, Gareth, and this is the shift that we need to make. That there's recognition that we are all fallible. And what I found in my first year in business is this is a really hard message to get across. So I'll give you this kind of standard response when I start to talk to organizations about decision making and decision quality. Is the higher up I go, the less the less recognition there seems to be that we are all fallible. It's always it seems like the standard response I tend to get is, look, I'm a great decision maker. That's why I'm in the C-suite.
That's why I'm in the position I'm in.
That's what exactly. Now, those bastards down the hall, however, they're not so great. So you should talk to them. And it is a big problem in our organization, but not with me. of course, I'm on your side, but with some of my colleagues, my God, I don't know how they, get through the day, and it's a cycle that kind of continues. And I think it takes a very courageous, brave leader, and this is a big leadership change that we need to be able to say no. We are all fallible. I, as the CEO, the chair, the CFO, whatever, I am fallible, and this is what we're doing to account for that. And I think that's the type of thing the successful organization of the future will be like that. But we're in a transition phase. There are far fewer organizations that are like that. But it's hard to pin down we've almost designed in the wrong kinds of structures in many places, because I can see why a manager wouldn't do that. Like if I was a senior, I can see why I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, what do you reward? What do you punish? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I can see how I wouldn't know. I cannot. And when people tell me this, I can see also. I can understand that. So it's almost like it's a puzzle or mystery. It's a very naughty problem.
And another dimension to that, and I was just thinking about some work that I've done for my own studies and the papers and things that I've read, is that the more context we have in a story, the less likely we are to judge others. And that's why we're doing these sort of first story, second story pieces. And so just thinking about how organizations structure their internal communications, that at the operational level, you might have a really thick story that tells you all that context. And as it aggregates up and goes up into the senior decision makers, the C-suite, it becomes one or two lines.
Exactly.
And the problem is when we don't have all of that information, our human tendency, fundamental attribution bias error, is that we jump into that and we fill the gaps in with what we believe we would have done, knowing what the outcome is. But in real time, people don't know with 100% certainty what the outcome's going to be like. It's a variety of different outcomes, and we see what it is. And so I think when you start telling learning-focused reports, you start to understand that quality because you've got the narrative. But the aggregation and the simplification goes up. We lose that detail. And that's just, sort of come to me just now as looking at some of the papers that I was thinking about actually putting in the show notes here.
Yeah. Oh, it's a huge struggle, because senior leaders, and it's getting harder. Senior leaders are so time crunched, and you get only a few minutes. Everything that you submit to a CEO has got to be super, super punchy. Half a page, like it's very challenging, and getting more and more challenging. The amount of paperwork that an executive committee member has. I'm thinking about my at BT Group, for example, that they would have to read is just a mountain of stuff every executive committee meeting. And it's just how do you make sense of this? So everything's got to be short, punchy.
Trust your team.
Exactly. So
if they give me some information, trust them that actually it's the correct answer. And almost that piece, and just thinking of David Marquette's Turn the Ship Around, is that bit of I intend to. So, the delegated authority is, and he was saying the only things that he would give executive decisions over was weapons release. Anything else was the team got on and did stuff and trusted his team to do that, as opposed to this sort of micromanaging, rubber stamping. And that might be organizational structures that say, we don't trust those people, only the execs can sign off on this. And you think, actually, what are they doing? Because they can't know the detail.
I fully with you on that. The other thing, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, that I think organizations try to solve some of these problems with more processes or
Mm.
better processes or things like that. And I just think that what's actually far better is to have a smaller, very, almost emotive set of heuristics that, look,
Hmm.
we will do this or not do that, or this kind of a thing to guide and devolve decision making throughout
Yeah.
the organization. And
Absolutely,
that's some of
because
the
I don't think we,
hmm,
organizations talk about risk management, and most of the stuff we're
hmm,
doing is uncertainty management, which is
yes,
heuristics, biases, mental
yes,
shortcuts, and actually coming up with some easy, ready reckoners and say, right, this is go, no go. This is not. And,
hmm, yeah,
what those could be when you kick the project off.
yes,
And, sort of the red teaming tools that can help you
hmm,
decide
hmm,
those sorts of things, to sit there and go, right, what are the assumptions we're making? What if they're not true? How do we know they're not true? What would be the
hmm,
indications before it all goes bang that things are
hmm,
starting to deviate? And
yeah,
I think the team at Effective Direction, Marcus Dimbleby,
hmm,
and the team he's got together are really all
hmm,
about building
hmm,
that applied critical thinking
hmm,
that
hmm,
allows people to build those shortcuts in place, mental
hmm,
shortcuts
hmm,
in
hmm,
place, rather than right, and then people just lose
yeah.
interest.
Yeah, again, it's another one of these big mindset shifts that I think that, and also the opportunity is there for organizations to take a lead on this. I don't think it's the vast majority of organizations that are doing this, but the few that start, that's interesting. And I've had Professor Dave Snowden on my show recently, and
Cool.
I love his stuff. But one of the things I keep coming back to is
Yeah.
his sort of distinction between complex and complicated, and the complex is the stuff where we don't always have an obvious right answer, where experts disagree,
Mm.
and we continue to design for I think complicated, which is more like an engineering problem. So a lot of the risk management stuff is designed for complicated. It's not designed for complex. So
Correct. Yeah.
having the heuristics, all the critical thinking stuff, and just what are the constraints, the boundaries that that we can put in place, or that are in
Yeah.
place, is very crucial to understand. Another factor, just go back to this case that I just to throw
Hmm.
into the mix here, was that this is a big organization, so there's lots of this is not the only business unit that so this
Hmm.
business unit wanted to do business in China, but just about everybody has got a big supply base from China, certainly
Hmm.
in the tech space, and so there are other parts of the business that were just that after the decision was made that thought, you're doing what? Right? We've got we've got, for example, government clients over here. They're not going to be too happy with this. Like, what access to
Yeah.
are you giving your JV partners to
But
our
yeah.
systems,
Yeah.
and how does that affect our these clients we have over here,
Interesting.
or the we've got this big this big supply base here, and well, what if this is unavailable or that's unavailable because there's a commercial dispute, like this. There's stuff that that just also wasn't considered. Again, it's a sort of local rationality, is that, well, this is my business unit, I'm making a decision for my business unit. I don't
Yeah.
particularly know or care how this affects others, because that's not what I'm incentivized to do. I'm incentivized to
Absolutely.
make my unit a success. And so it's that those internal connections in big complex
It
organizations.
was internal
The,
competitions.
yeah, yeah. And so so that was also a
You've got
factor.
the yeah, you hold the company name. You are a department or a business unit inside that company name, but actually you're in competition inside your organization.
Yeah.
And that drives, I'm going to say it's got to, and I know it does, it drives wrong behaviors because you end up competing against finite resources. And so you end up with situations that you just described. Hey, we've got this cool capability. Well, actually, what risk does that bring to the rest of the organization in terms of contract, in terms of security? It's a really interesting piece. You said your profession was sort of the risk management side. How much do you focus on the reward element of risk? Because obviously risk is often considered the loss. But do you actually ask, why are people behaving the way they do, and what are their rewards that they're moving towards?
Yeah. So, Gareth, I'm going to preface that by saying I'm a recovering risk professional. I no longer call myself a risk professional. So I've kind of, not that I fully denounced risk management, but I've just gotten so sort of disillusioned with it that I don't really. So I'm a recovering risk professional.
That's fair.
And so I'm all about decision quality, which covers the upside and the downside. Is it a good decision? Are we optimizing our chances of success? Are we protecting the downside? And to me, there's almost the risk management as a field has a bit of a complex, and a lot of risk professionals say, oh, hey, well, I don't just do bad risk, I also do opportunities. But that to me is just the what that is kind of like, if risk management was a high school student, they're trying to be one of the cool kids, right? But they're kind of so there's a complex going on that if you really were about opportunities, then you'd be part of the commercial team. And so anyway, it's for me, I find it a bit of a tired kind of a debate, and so I just talk about good decisions, and that covers the the upside, the downside, the thinking about the unintended, and it's just a far richer and just more real, practical space. So I can if you want anything to kind of go, in quotes, viral on LinkedIn in the risk space, and you start talking about risk is opportunity as well, and it's
so like one of the previous guests, Ben Cattaneo, we were just talking about ice climbing, mountaineering, and why would people do that? Because the loss is there. You go, but it's the exposure, it's the opportunity to get out there and push our boundaries. So the adventure sports is an interesting piece when it comes to that risk management piece. So the final sort of section of go on.
Sure, no, it's just and the sort of the lessons that, because that's real risk, like that's if you get that wrong, then you the consequence in your space. I mean, you get something wrong, it's a life or death situation potentially, and that makes it all very, very real. And most people that work in,
but I think most people dismiss that. I think in the adventure sports space, most people sort of don't really consider the fatal outcomes because they don't hear about it, and it doesn't happen very often. So again, we're in a heuristic space that, yes, it's there, but nobody, in the grand scheme of things, the risk of dying on a dive is about 1 in 200,000 dives. And people sit there and go, well, I'm never going to do 200,000 dives, therefore I'm not going to die.
Right.
And the logical person will go, well, that's really stupid. That way you look at it, it's like, well, no, it's not, because that's how our mental shortcut process works. So it applies in the adventure sports space as well. But
interesting.
But it's much more visceral. It's there. So
it's much more visceral. And I'm a cyclist, and I cycling is potentially
road cycling.
Yeah, and there are all these. It doesn't take. It's not high likelihood, but it doesn't take much for something to you could be riding in a group and touch the front wheel, and and it's just a moment. It could be just a moment, and yeah, it's very hard for our brains to wrap our heads around that, and the odds
The
around that. So
uncertainties that are there.
yeah,
It's easy just to ignore it. There we go. So the final session
yeah.
of the sort of podcast is a book or a paper or a video that you'd recommend people go and sort of consume that helps understand some of the concepts that you believe in or that we've discussed in this session. So what would you recommend? And it doesn't have to be one. You could put multiple ones in there. I'll stick them in the show notes. It's not a problem.
I highly recommend Annie Duke's stuff. I'm a huge fan. So my favorite is her first book, Thinking in Bets, which I really it's a wonderful way of framing decisions as bets, and just a nice reminder. Even if you say 1 in 200,000 or one, that we can only we can play the best hand or make a certain bet. There's always a chance to that things go south, and just that mindset just helps bring out the right questions. Oh, should I be betting? I think her stuff is great. Gary Klein stuff is fabulous. I'm a real and I've kind of swung a little bit more in the direction of the importance of intuition and naturalistic decision making than I was I think earlier in my career. And I think I had a bit of you could quantify everything and come up with a calculus, and intuition matters, and insight matter, and his stuff on insights I think is fabulous, and I highly recommend his work. But there's loads of stuff that's out there.
That's cool. And I think one of the big bits that comes out of Gary Klein's work is the importance of experience to understand that you don't know what you don't know, or that bit where expertise allows you to see the invisible, where something isn't quite right because it's not there, whereas novices will look for things to be present in the scene to help understand what that situation is. And going back to that piece of putting processes in place or using AI, that really, it doesn't help build our experiential knowledge and our critical thinking. It's basically ding, 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 ding. And whoever wrote that process is the one that's putting the critical decision trees in place, or the AI is programmed. As a synthesis tool, I think AI is fantastic. As a critical decision-making tool in uncertainty, there's a whole world of hurt waiting out there for people if they don't recognize the limitations.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Ben, thank you very much for your time today. It's been really cool. And just, we were talking beforehand of always learning. And so listening to you talk about some of the stuff just sort of reinforces bits that I know, but also give me some new ideas about things. So, and I hope that's the same with the listeners. So, Ben, thank you very much. I'll put your contact details in the show notes. And if anybody's interested, go and find him. Thanks very much.
Gareth, thank you very much.